Hey there. If you've ever watched a little boy look at his mom like she's his entire world, or heard a grown man speak about his mother with awe, devotion, and even tears in his voice, you've probably thought to yourself, there's something different about that connection. And you're absolutely right. There is something special, almost unspoken, about the bond between a mother and her son. But why? Why do moms and sons so often have this unique closeness that seems to stand the test of time? In this video, we're going deep into the psychology, science, neuroscience, and real-world experiences behind this bond. I'll be sharing well-researched insights, emotional truths, cultural dynamics, and the biological hardwiring that helps explain this dynamic. And if you're a mom to a boy, or you're a son remembering your mom, I think you'll walk away from this feeling seen, grounded, and maybe with a new appreciation for the power of this connection. Let's begin with the biology. From the moment a woman becomes pregnant, her body begins producing oxytocin, often referred to as the bonding hormone. This hormone increases dramatically during labor and breastfeeding, strengthening the emotional connection between mother and baby. But here's where it gets interesting. Studies have shown that oxytocin affects male and female brains differently. According to research published in the Journal of Neuroscience, boys' brains are actually more sensitive to maternal oxytocin than girls. In early infancy, boys tend to show stronger neural activation in response to their mother's voice and touch. This suggests that from a very early age, boys may be biologically primed to form a uniquely intense bond with their mothers. A 2010 study conducted by researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison also found that boys who had a strong maternal attachment during early childhood had better emotional regulation and were less likely to struggle with behavioral issues during adolescence. That's not to say daughters don't bond deeply with their mothers. Of course they do. But the nature of the bond often differs. Daughters may share more emotional mirroring and identity development, while sons often look to their mothers as their first safe emotional anchor, particularly in a world where male vulnerability isn't always welcomed. There's also the matter of brain chemistry. A 2014 study published in PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, revealed that when mothers viewed images of their sons versus their daughters, their brain's reward centers, specifically the ventral tegmental area, lit up more significantly when viewing their sons. This doesn't mean moms love their sons more, but it does suggest that the brain reacts slightly differently based on the gender of the child. The reward system may be more activated by certain behaviors or facial expressions from sons, which in turn reinforces bonding behaviors. We also can't ignore the social and emotional conditioning that plays a part in this dynamic. In many cultures, boys are taught from a young age to be strong, stoic, and emotionally contained. Mothers often become the only person in a young boy's life who gives full permission to feel. Moms are typically the emotional safe haven, the place where crying is allowed, where comfort is offered without judgment, and where love is constant, regardless of performance. That sense of unconditional acceptance sticks with many boys for life. You'll often hear adult men say things like, "My mom was always there for me," or "I could tell her anything." That doesn't just happen overnight. That trust is built moment by moment, starting in the earliest years. There's also some really compelling data on emotional expression. In a 2008 study published in the journal Emotion, researchers found that mothers tend to respond more sensitively to their sons' emotional cues than fathers do, especially when it comes to fear, sadness, or confusion. Fathers, while incredibly important in a child's development, may be more focused on play and discipline. Mothers often occupy the role of emotional interpreter. They teach boys how to name their feelings, how to handle them, and how to feel safe expressing them. This dynamic often leads to a deep emotional intimacy that can be harder for boys to find elsewhere, especially if they grow up in environments where vulnerability is frowned upon. Let's bring in some real-life perspective. Think about this. Across time and across cultures, how many times have you heard stories of mothers going to extraordinary lengths for their sons? From single moms working multiple jobs to support their boys, to the fierce way many moms defend their sons in times of struggle, there's a quiet but powerful loyalty that exists in many of these relationships, and it goes both ways. Research has shown that men are statistically more likely to act as long-term caregivers for their mothers than for their fathers. In a study conducted by the National Alliance for Caregiving, over 60% of adult sons reported they would be more inclined to provide full-time care for their mothers than their dads if the situation required it. It's a dynamic that often flies under the radar, but it speaks volumes about the deep emotional connection at play. We can also look at attachment theory here. According to John Bowlby's foundational work on attachment, the earliest bonds we form with our caregivers shape how we view relationships for the rest of our lives. Boys who experience consistent, loving connection with their mothers in the first few years of life are more likely to develop what's called a secure attachment style. This means they feel safe in relationships, are better at managing stress, and often have stronger emotional resilience. Now let's go a little deeper into the psychological side. In Jungian psychology, the mother is a key archetype in the human psyche, not just as a parent, but as a symbolic figure. For boys, the mother archetype often represents comfort, safety, and wholeness. Carl Jung believed that a boy's development into a balanced adult man involved both separation from and integration of the mother's emotional presence. It's not about clinging to the mother indefinitely, but understanding the foundational role she plays in shaping his identity. We see echoes of this in countless stories and mythologies. From ancient Greek legends to modern-day movies, the figure of the mother often holds a sacred place in a boy's story arc. Think of stories like Forrest Gump, where the mother's wisdom guides the protagonist, or Good Will Hunting, where the emotional healing of the character can't fully begin until the maternal wounds are acknowledged. So much of a boy's early worldview is shaped through his interactions with his mother. She's often the one who teaches him language, who comforts him during illness, who reads the bedtime stories that shape his imagination. These moments aren't trivial, they're formative. In fact, a long-term developmental study conducted by the University of Reading found that the quality of mother-son interaction at age 3 was a strong predictor of emotional intelligence at age 13. Boys who experienced consistent warmth, presence, and conversation with their mothers showed higher self-awareness, empathy, and emotional management in adolescence. Let's also talk about identity. Boys often develop their emotional blueprint through observing and interacting with their moms. When a mom models emotional fluency, openness, kindness, and strength, her son absorbs those lessons, even if he doesn't articulate it. Over time, these qualities become part of how he relates to himself and others. That's why, for many men, their mother becomes the subconscious template for emotional safety. In romantic relationships, men often seek out, knowingly or not, the emotional dynamics they first experienced with their moms. That doesn't mean they're trying to date their mother, obviously. It means they're searching for that same feeling of being emotionally accepted, understood, and cared for. Now, let's zoom out and look at how culture, family roles, and life transitions shape, and sometimes stress, that bond. In almost every culture around the world, the mother-son relationship is framed with a sense of deep loyalty and obligation. Think about the phrase, "A boy's first love is his mother." That's not just a sentimental quote. It reflects an idea that's been reinforced in storytelling, film, music, and even religion for centuries. In Italian culture, there's the archetype of the mama's boy, and while it can be used playfully, it's rooted in truth. Italian family structures often place the mother at the emotional center, and sons are taught to hold her in the highest esteem. In Latin American cultures, madre is often revered above all, associated with strength, sacrifice, and unconditional care. In Indian families, the bond between mothers and sons is deeply intertwined with values of duty, respect, and emotional support, and it often persists well into adulthood. This cultural reinforcement can both strengthen and complicate the bond. For example, in families where emotional dependence is encouraged long past childhood, the son may have difficulty forming independent romantic relationships or learning to manage conflict without his mother's input. In some cultures, the mother may even have a strong say in who her son marries, or if he marries at all. And yet, in these same families, that tight-knit emotional foundation often becomes a son's lifelong anchor. It's the relationship that reminds him of who he is when everything else feels uncertain. Let's shift into another dynamic that plays a big role here. What happens when the bond is tested or interrupted? Not every mother-son relationship is smooth. In fact, some are riddled with tension, distance, or disappointment. And when this happens, the emotional impact is often profound. Boys who experience neglect or emotional unavailability from their mothers often internalize that pain in different ways than girls do. According to a study from the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry, boys with distant or critical mothers were significantly more likely to develop externalizing behaviors, like aggression or acting out, while girls in similar situations tended to internalize their pain through withdrawal or anxiety. What that tells us is that boys don't feel less, they just often don't know how to express it. If their bond with their mom is fractured, they may not be able to explain the loss in words, but it can show up later in anger, restlessness, or even a deep fear of emotional intimacy. This is especially true during adolescence, a period that's often the most strained time in the mother-son bond. Sons are trying to assert independence, moms are trying to hold on to connection, and communication breaks down. But here's what the research shows. If a solid emotional bond was built during the first 10 years of life, the relationship tends to rebound after adolescence. In fact, by their mid-20s, many sons reconnect deeply with their mothers, often with a newfound appreciation. One longitudinal study from the University of Michigan followed over 1,000 mother-son pairs for 25 years. They found that boys who had emotionally present mothers during early childhood were far more likely to maintain frequent, meaningful contact with their moms well into adulthood, even if they went through rough patches during their teens. So what helps maintain that closeness through the ups and downs? Let's talk about emotional modeling again, because it matters. A mother who allows her son to see her as a full human being, not just a caretaker, builds a more balanced relationship. When a mom shares her feelings in age-appropriate ways, apologizes when she's wrong, and sets boundaries with love, she's teaching her son how to handle relationships with empathy and respect. There's also the factor of emotional vocabulary. Boys raised by mothers who talk about feelings, name them out loud, and make space for emotional messiness are often better equipped to form secure romantic relationships later. That doesn't mean they'll never struggle, but it does mean they'll have a foundation to come back to. Now let's bring in a different angle. What happens when a mother-son bond is too enmeshed? Because yes, closeness is beautiful, but over-involvement can lead to blurred boundaries. In psychology, this is sometimes called emotional enmeshment. It's when the mother and son rely too heavily on each other for emotional regulation, making it hard for the son to develop his own independent sense of self. You might see this when adult sons still defer major life decisions to their mothers, or when they struggle to form intimate partnerships because no one compares to mom. This dynamic can lead to conflict within the family, especially if a romantic partner feels like they're competing with a mother figure. And from the mother's side, this over-reliance can create burnout, resentment, or identity loss. She may struggle to let go as her son grows into adulthood, not out of control, but out of fear. Fear of losing connection, relevance, or purpose. The healthiest mother-son relationships evolve over time. What begins as dependence becomes trust, then guidance, then friendship. Always with love at the center, but with enough space for both people to grow. There's a powerful example of this in a well-known longitudinal study out of Harvard, known as the Grant Study. It followed hundreds of men over 75 years to understand what makes a good life. One of the key findings? Men who had warm relationships with their mothers during childhood earned significantly more money, had stronger romantic connections, and scored higher on measures of life satisfaction, not just as children, but as men in their 50s and 60s. That's how deep this bond goes. It doesn't just shape how a boy feels in the moment, It influences his lifelong emotional intelligence, career, relationships, and sense of self-worth. Think about that for a second. A mother's love doesn't just comfort her son as a toddler, it follows him into boardrooms, breakups, fatherhood, and beyond. It becomes part of the way he handles stress, conflict, and love itself. And the reverse is also true. A son's love, when expressed freely, can bring healing, joy, and deep purpose to his mother's life. There's something incredibly powerful about hearing a grown man say, without shame, "I love my mom." Not because he's dependent, but because he recognizes the impact she had on him, and he honors it. Let's also talk about what happens when that bond is cut too early, through loss, trauma, or estrangement. Losing a mother, physically or emotionally, can leave a profound mark on a boy's identity. Sons who lose their moms early in life often report a kind of invisible wound. Even if they had loving support elsewhere, the absence of that primary connection often creates a hole that's hard to articulate. Some grow up to become incredibly empathetic men, always looking to protect or nurture others. Some, without guidance or healing, struggle to trust or attach fully in adult relationships. It's not about assigning blame, it's about recognizing how central that early maternal bond is to a boy's emotional blueprint. And the same goes for mothers who lose contact with their sons due to addiction, mental illness, relational rifts, or distance. That loss can feel like a part of their own identity has gone missing. It's not just grief, it's disorientation. That's why reconciliation, even years later, can be so deeply emotional. Because it's not just a relationship being restored, it's a piece of the self. And yet, healing is possible. Even strained mother-son relationships can be mended with time, honesty, therapy, and forgiveness. The emotional bond, once formed, tends to remain somewhere beneath the surface. The challenge is learning to reconnect without expectations, to rebuild trust without control, and to redefine love without fear. When this happens, when a mother and son choose to relate to each other as full humans, not just roles, something profound takes place. They stop reenacting old scripts and start co-writing a new chapter together. As sons grow into adults, the mother-son bond doesn't disappear. It simply shifts. What begins as dependence in infancy often becomes emotional loyalty in adulthood. But like any relationship, it takes conscious work to keep it healthy, supportive, and mutual. Let's start with one of the most powerful turning points in a man's life, when he becomes a father himself. This is where the bond with his mother can deepen, strain, or even transform completely. When a man enters fatherhood, especially for the first time, he often begins to see his mother through new eyes. For the first time, he may begin to truly grasp the sacrifices she made, the exhaustion she pushed through, and the countless invisible tasks she handled without thanks. He may recall things he once took for granted: bedtime stories, meals on the table, clean laundry, emotional comfort, and finally understand just how much effort those small acts required. Many men report feeling a deep wave of gratitude toward their mothers after becoming parents themselves. This moment often reignites connection. If the bond was already strong, it tends to grow even more intimate. If it was strained or distant, fatherhood can act as a soft bridge toward healing. A new shared identity emerges, two people who understand what it means to care for a child. According to a 2015 study published in the journal Parenting Science and Practice, men who had strong maternal bonds during childhood reported higher confidence and emotional resilience during the transition into fatherhood. They were more likely to seek emotional support from their partners, show patience with their infants, and embrace the emotional demands of parenting. But it's not always easy. When the bond has been enmeshed, meaning the mother had a hard time letting go, a son's entry into fatherhood can create tension. Sometimes, the mother struggles with her changing role. She's no longer the center of her son's world. Now he has a partner, a child, and responsibilities that don't include her. That shift can feel like a kind of grief. In other cases, the son may begin to set new boundaries. Becoming a father often forces men to examine the emotional legacies they inherited. They start to ask themselves, what do I want to pass on to my child? What do I want to leave behind? This internal reflection can surface old wounds, especially if the mother-son bond was emotionally complicated growing up. Some sons begin to question behaviors they once accepted. They might see their mother's over-involvement, emotional inconsistency, or criticism more clearly now that they're raising a child of their own. And that clarity can lead to anger, distance, or redefinition of the relationship. But here's the good news. Many men find that fatherhood gives them a second chance to rebuild what was missing. They begin to model the kind of parenting they wish they had. They might even use their new understanding to initiate honest conversations with their mothers. Not with blame, but with curiosity and a desire to move forward. Now let's flip the perspective for a moment. For mothers, watching their sons become fathers can be one of the most profound and emotional milestones of their lives. It can bring immense pride, seeing their baby now raise a baby of his own. It can also bring up grief, watching him pour love into a new little person and realizing their chapter as the central nurturer has ended. The healthiest mother-son relationships make space for both, for celebration and sadness, for connection and release. Another area where this bond evolves is through the aging process. As the mother grows older and sometimes more vulnerable, the son often steps into a caregiving role, emotionally, logistically, and sometimes physically. This reversal of roles can be both beautiful and painful. According to a report by AARP, nearly 40% of family caregivers are men, and a significant percentage of them are sons caring for aging mothers. These men report high levels of emotional commitment, often attending to medical appointments, managing finances, or simply being present in the final chapters of their mother's life. For many of these men, the caregiving is not a burden. It's a way of repaying a debt they never felt they could put into words. A way of saying, "You were there for me. Now I'm here for you." One son in a caregiving study put it simply, "She gave me life. I just want to give her comfort in the time she has left." Moments like these show how deep and cyclical the mother-son bond can be. It's not about dependence. It's about legacy, emotional, relational, and spiritual. Even after death, the presence of a mother can remain powerful in a man's life. Some men carry their mother's advice in their minds forever. Some instinctively parent the way their mother parented. Some revisit memories at milestones, weddings, childbirth, promotions, and feel her voice in their heart, even if she's no longer physically present. This phenomenon has been backed up by research in grief psychology. According to Dr. Colin Murray Parks, a leading figure in bereavement research, the death of a mother often triggers a reevaluation of identity in men. For some, it deepens their sense of purpose. For others, it reopens old emotional wounds. But almost always, it alters their inner emotional landscape permanently. Let's return to the idea of emotional safety for a moment. Throughout life, the mother-son bond often remains a kind of emotional refuge. For men who feel unable to be vulnerable elsewhere, their mother is often the one person they can still fall apart in front of. She's the keeper of childhood, the holder of their softest memories. That doesn't mean the bond is always smooth or without conflict, but its foundation is often unshakable, because it was laid long before the son had the words to describe it. Of course, not all men grow up with present, loving mothers. And it's important to acknowledge that this experience, this special bond, is not universal. But even when it's absent, its shape is often still there. The longing for a maternal bond can be just as defining as the bond itself. That absence becomes part of the story, part of the search for belonging, healing, or understanding. And for mothers who feel distant from their sons, who may worry the closeness is gone, know this: it's never too late to rebuild. Adult sons, even the emotionally guarded ones, often carry a quiet yearning for connection. They may not always initiate. They may not always respond in words, but small gestures, sincere apologies, and consistent presence can go a long way. In fact, Research from the Gottman Institute suggests that even one emotionally corrective conversation between parent and adult child can significantly shift the tone of the relationship, creating new patterns of trust and intimacy. Let's also recognize how important this bond is to the larger emotional health of families and even communities. When boys grow up with emotionally available mothers, they're more likely to become men who are emotionally available to others. They're more likely to become partners who listen, fathers who show up, leaders who lead with empathy. The ripple effect of a loving mother-son bond doesn't stop at the home. It touches classrooms, workplaces, marriages, and generations. A secure, loving connection with a mother becomes a kind of emotional reference point, a map for how to handle the world with gentleness, strength, and clarity. So if you're raising a boy right now, or you've already raised one, know that the work you're doing matters, not just in his childhood, but in the man he will become. The connection you form, the conversations you have, the emotional safety you offer, it all builds a kind of legacy, one that doesn't show up in loud ways, but in the quiet moments, in how he speaks to his children, how he treats his partner, how he speaks to himself when no one else is listening. That's the long arc of the mother-son bond. Many adult sons love their mothers deeply, but they often struggle to express it in the ways their mothers might expect. They might not call often, they might forget birthdays, they may seem emotionally distant during family visits. But beneath that behavior, in many cases, is not a lack of love. It's simply a different emotional language. According to a 2017 study published in the Journal of Family Communication, adult sons frequently report feeling closer to their mothers than their behaviors suggest. In private, they describe their moms as the most influential person in their life. But many of them also say they feel pressure to be strong, capable, and self-sufficient, traits that sometimes conflict with emotional vulnerability. Here's what many adult sons wish their moms knew. He hears you, even if he doesn't always respond right away. He remembers the small things you did, the rides to practice, the nights you stayed up, the way you defended him when no one else did. He doesn't always know how to say thank you, but he feels it. And when he pulls away, it's often not about rejection. It may be about needing space to define himself, especially if he was very close to you as a child. Independence doesn't mean detachment. It can actually be a sign that your relationship gave him the stability to explore the world on his own. Still, conflict happens, and the mother-son bond is not immune to miscommunication, hurt feelings, or emotional walls. The key is learning how to address those moments without causing deeper rupture. If you're a mother and your adult son has grown distant, here are a few things to keep in mind. Avoid guilt trips. Statements like, "You never call me anymore," often trigger shame or defensiveness, which leads to more withdrawal. Instead, try something softer and specific. "I miss talking to you. Can we find a time to catch up this week?" Resist the urge to micromanage. Adult sons want to feel respected as men. Offering unsolicited advice, especially about relationships, parenting, or money, can feel suffocating, even if it's well-meaning. If you want to offer insight, ask first, "Would you like my thoughts on that? Or do you just need to vent?" Don't mistake silence for rejection. Sometimes, sons retreat emotionally because they're going through something hard. They might not know how to talk about it yet. Your steady presence, even a simple text that says, "Thinking of you," can open the door without pushing too hard. If you're a son trying to repair or strengthen your relationship with your mom, here's what helps. You don't have to be perfect to reconnect. If it's been a while, don't wait for the right moment or the right words. A simple message, "Hi, Mom, I've been thinking about you," can begin a whole new chapter. If there are things you've never said but want to, consider writing them down. Some men find it easier to express emotion in writing. Others find it easier face to face. Choose what works for you, but don't let pride block you from something that might bring healing. If the relationship was complicated or painful, you don't have to ignore that, but you can approach it with honesty and maturity. You can say, "There are things we never talked about, and I think I'm ready to." And finally, if you've lost your mother, or you're a mother who's lost her son, physically or emotionally, know this: The bond doesn't disappear. It changes form. Grief is not the absence of love, it's proof of its depth. Many people find comfort in continuing the relationship in a new way. Speaking aloud to a mother who's passed, writing letters, creating traditions in her honor. These rituals are more than sentiment. They are part of the healing process. For those who are estranged but open to reconciliation, therapy can offer a neutral space to explore the pain without judgment. Reconnection doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means choosing to build something new in the present. As we wrap up this conversation, remember this. The bond between a mother and son is powerful, not because it's always perfect, but because it endures. It endures through silence, through change, through growing up and growing apart, through mistakes, apologies, and attempts to repair. It endures because at its best, it's rooted in something timeless, the desire to see and be seen, to love and be loved, not as roles, but as people. If you're a mom, your presence, your empathy, and your ability to let your son grow while still staying emotionally available, that is one of the most powerful gifts you can offer. And if you're a son, your willingness to stay emotionally connected, to reflect, to honor where you came from, and to show up even imperfectly, that is a form of love that speaks louder than words. So wherever you are in your mother-son journey, connected, disconnected, healing, remembering, may this be a reminder. You're not alone. And the bond you share, or once shared, still matters more than you probably know. If this resonated with you, consider sharing this with someone who might need it. And if you'd like more stories and insights like this, make sure to subscribe and keep this conversation going in the comments. Thanks for being here.